Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. I am not a linguist, or a historian, or even that smart of a guy, but I am a journalist, and as such, I use words a lot. I obviously do a lot of yapping on this show, but I also write up investigations, profiles, interviews, and am playing with words almost every day of my life. I have a vested interest in learning more and more about words, sentences, various languages, and how making sounds or writing scribbles has near universal meaning. Further, I'm fascinated by the power of language. It does magical things, both directly and indirectly. And as much as I think words can create beauty, I also believe, and rather passionately believe, that they can coerce and manipulate people into rather evil states of mind. In fact, words are essential to the art of creating cults. The word language comes from ancient words meaning tongue and speech, and it can refer to both natural languages like English or French, or created systems like computer languages. And debates about language's nature and origin have existed since ancient times and include ideas about whether language is a innate human ability or a tool that shapes our experiences, with important contributions made from different famous thinkers over time. And theories about the origin of language differ. Some say it evolved gradually from earlier systems among our ancestors, while others believe it appeared suddenly and uniquely only in humans. And within these ideas, some think language is more genetic, and others believe it is learned through social interaction. And while most scholars support continuity theories, that is, that this has evolved, there are different ideas about whether language developed from animal communication, gestures, music, or other sources, with language's emergence estimated to be between 60,000 to 100,000 years ago, but the exact timeline of when language developed is heavily debated. And one of the ironic things about studying or investigating language is you have to utilize language to do so. You can't talk about talking without talking. You can't write about writing without writing. And crazier still, I can't talk about language without using one. And there are many languages, but I am limited to using English. So this can get rather heady and frustrating, but it's valuable to peel back the layers of existence for yourself rather than having someone tell you all the answers. But I have a job to do, and here is the simplest way I can summarize how linguists describe language. Language is a complex system of symbols that people use to communicate. It has three main parts: signs, meanings, and the code that connects those things. And the study of how these signs and meanings are combined, used, and understood is called semiotics. Signs can be sounds, gestures, letters, or symbols, depending on whether the language is spoken, signed, or written. Think of it like a puzzle where pieces, signs, fit together to create a picture, meaning. And human language has some special features. One is arbitrariness. That's a fun word, arbitrariness, meaning there's no natural link between a word and its meaning, like how the word dog doesn't actually resemble a dog. It doesn't sound like a dog. A dog doesn't go dog. And also when you write out DOG, it does not look like a dog. We don't just draw dog pictures to each other. And another feature is duality, where smaller parts, like sounds, combine to form large structure, like words. Language is also made of discrete units, like building blocks, which can be rearranged to create new structures. And lastly, language is productive, meaning we can use a limited set of elements to create an infinite number of sentences. There are only so many sounds and shapes, but there is no limit aside from time and space as to how you can combine them. And the rules for putting words and phrases together are called syntax or grammar, like the rules of a game. And semantics is the study of meanings attached to these words or phrases. For example, the word dog in English refers to a specific animal. And while I can say, "Quit dogging on me, man," or "that was doggone good," the meaning of dog is still technically the same, even when adding other sounds or words around the word dog makes a point that has nothing to do with a dog. And the collection of all words and their meanings in a language is called the lexicon, or the dictionaries are based on a lexicon. And all languages have a basic structure that connects actions to subjects, like the cat, subject, sat, action, on the mat, object. This is called predication. Semantics often involves figuring out if statements are true or false. And recently, more dynamic models consider the context, which is a study in pragmatics. Confused yet? Don't worry, none of this is essential knowledge to living a good life. But if you do take the time to understand how humans communicate, you realize we communicate with incredible efficiency and know how to break the rules that I'm explaining often. The thing to watch out for is those who break the rules in order to manipulate groups into giving them power. More on that later. Language can be expressed through sounds, gestures, or symbols. Phonology is the study of how these sounds or signs create meaning. Sounds in a language are called phonemes, the smallest units that can change the meaning of a word, like the difference between bat and pat is only the difference between p and b. But one's a verb that is a very specific kind of touch, and the other is a noun that could mean an animal or sports equipment. Yet the only way we know the difference between those words is a barely noticeable difference in how we smack our lips. B, p, b, p. And writing systems use visual symbols to represent language, similar to how traffic signs represent rules for drivers. These symbols can be letters, syllables, or whole words. The direction of writing varies among cultures, and linguists use the International Phonetic Alphabet to represent all possible sounds. If you ever looked up how to pronounce something, you've seen those letters that are sometimes backwards, doubled, or have some sort of scratch above them. Grammar is about how words and the smallest meaning units, called morphemes, combine into a sentence. Morphemes can be free, which is like words, or bound, which are affixes like prefixes and suffixes. Think of them like Lego pieces that can be put together to build different structure. And languages have different word classes, such as nouns, which are names for things, verbs, actions, and adjectives, descriptions. Some languages allow new words to be added easily, while other languages have a fixed number of words and very specific rules about combining words. And languages use different methods to show relationships between words. English relies on a word order, like placing the subject before the verb. The cat sat. In Latin, word endings change to show these relationships. And some languages have verbs that change form to agree with their subjects and objects, which is called agreement. And then you have this idea of syntax, which refers to the rules for word order and sentence structure. For example, in English, I love you makes sense, but love you I doesn't quite. And syntax also includes how questions are formed and how complex sentences are structured. Languages can be classified by their grammatical types, such as their word order. For example, English follows an SVO, subject, verb, object order, like the dog, subject, chased, verb, the ball, object. Other languages might use different orders. If you've taken Spanish, they often use a different order. And shared features of languages might come from universal laws or from similar solutions to common problems, like how different cultures might invent similar tools for cooking, but call them different things or use them slightly differently. Linguistic typology studies these patterns to understand why they occur, and by studying different languages, you can get profound insights into the history of different cultures. A living language is one that has at least one native speaker, and the number of living languages ranges from 6,000 to 7,000, depending on how one defines a language versus a dialect. For instance, Danish is classified as two languages, Danish and Judish. Also, it usually is considered one language with different dialects, and about 389 languages have over 1 million speakers, and those languages make up for 94% of the world's population, while the remaining languages are only spoken by 6% of people. The line between a language and a dialect is very blurry, often influenced by politics, culture, and writing systems rather than any kind of strict linguistic criteria. Languages belong to families, which are groups of languages with a common ancestor. The largest family is Indo-European, spoken by about 46% of people, and that includes English, Spanish, and Hindi. Other significant families include Sino-Tibetan, Niger-Congo, and Afro-Asiatic. Language diversity is greatest in regions like Papua New Guinea and West Africa. And languages face endangerment when fewer people speak them, often replaced by dominant language due to globalization. There are some efforts ongoing worldwide to revitalize endangered languages, specifically those of indigenous people, and preserve cultural diversity, with some successful examples like the Welsh language serving as models for other endangered languages. So, how did we get so many different languages? Well, let me tell you the story I was told as a historical fact. And this is embarrassing, but perhaps you heard this story too. Once upon a time, all humans on Earth spoke the same language and could easily understand each other. They decided to build a magnificent city with a tower so big that it would reach into heaven, and it would symbolize their unity and ambition. And this grand project took place in the land of Shinar, where people worked together harmoniously using their common language to communicate and collaborate. But as the tower grew taller and taller, it caught the attention of God, who was concerned about the potential of humans becoming too powerful and losing their humility. So to prevent this, a plan was devised to disrupt their communication and slow down their progress. One day, as the workers arrived at the construction site, they found that they could no longer understand each other. It was as if overnight, their single language had fragmented into many different languages. The once cohesive group of workers began to speak in tongues that were strange and foreign to one another. Instructions were misunderstood, and the once smooth cooperation turned into chaos and confusion. Unable to communicate effectively, the people abandoned the tower project. They scattered across the earth, forming new communities based on shared languages. Over time, these groups developed their own distinct cultures and identities, influenced by their unique linguistic traits. This dispersion marked the beginning of linguistic diversity among humans. As these groups settled in different regions, their languages continued to evolve, influenced by their environments, lifestyles, and interactions with other communities. So, what's weird about this origin myth of language diversity is that there is a lot read into a rather already ambiguous passage, because the passage itself actually reads like this. This is from Genesis 11, 1 through 9. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and fire them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." The Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which mortals had built, and the Lord said, "Look, They are one people, they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, it was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language for all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So, funny enough, a plain reading doesn't make it seem like the people were the bad guy, but rather the Lord or Yahweh. People were getting along, and God goes, I don't like this. Further, there were 6,000 people working on this, and then they started speaking differently, because that's about how many languages there are. Or maybe there were less and they eventually expanded, but I think it's rather clear that this is a fable. Even when I preached out of this passage, I did the thing where I made the passage sound like a condemnation of human pride. It's really a story about how we on our own can't get to God. And if you say that, then you can transition nicely into a gospel narrative about how Jesus is the only gateway to God, which is what Babel means, and turn from your sins, believe in him, yada yada, y'all know the spiel. But while the fable is actually one of the oldest fables we have as a species, it's been adapted in very different cultures and religions, and it's compelling for the religious and also fascinating for the historian. But it's obviously not grounded in any reality, because the Tower of Babel crumbles under scrutiny. It's a narrative riddled with inconsistencies and even theological absurdities. At its core, Genesis 11 presents a sequence of events where humanity, unified in speech and purpose, seeks to build the tower that could breach heavens, yet the tale's first flaw lies in its premise, contradicted by earlier biblical passages, because in Genesis 10, it delineates the descendants of Noah's sons are already dispersed with distinct languages and cultures. And so the assertion that the whole earth was of one language in Genesis 11 is in contradiction to what's already been said in Genesis. And moreover, the narrative's depiction of Nimrod founding Babel, swiftly followed by the tower's constructions, strains credulity. I mean, the scant timeline between these events bellies any realistic establishment of a city or a kingdom. And so this narrative is clearly more of a myth than history. And central to the story's climax is the intervention of a supposedly omnipotent deity that's alarmed by humanity's unity. The deity's decision to confuse their language not only reveals a rather petty insecurity about human potential, but also contradicts the notion of divine omniscience. This anthropomorphic portrayal of a god who descends from on high to see the city, that he has to come down to look, implies kind of a lack of omnipresence and omniscience. It's all inconsistent with the greater theological claims of Christianity. And equally baffling is the divine proclamation, let us go down. Let us go down? Who is this us? And such pluralistic language hints at maybe some polytheism or some other spiritual ideas. And it's a theological conundrum that challenges very orthodox interpretations of monotheism. And you can't just explain it away with some rambling about the Trinity. Moreover, the deity's punitive act of scattering people across the earth as a means to diversify languages defies linguistic evolution and anthropology. Languages, as observed throughout history, evolve organically through cultural exchange and geographic isolation, not through divine intervention. This theological conceit not only fails to explain the multiplicity of languages, but also betrays an ignorance of natural linguistic processes. This is an ancient allegory struggling to explain the complexities of language diversity. It's a tale burdened with theological contradictions and cultural naivety. Its portrayal of a capricious, insecure deity at odds with empirical reality underscores the narrative's mythological rather than historical value. But I believe this. I believe this story because I was told this story. It stopped me from asking more questions about language. Why are there so many languages? What theological purpose would that serve for this God? In fact, language differences, even syntax and dialect differences, have caused much bloodshed and hatred between people groups. Why would God want there to be such hatred and chaos if he was a good God? Because that story makes him sound rather like an evil mastermind. Well, leaving the jealousy of gods and fantasy behind, the real history of language is not exactly easy for a Christian cult leader to reconcile with other beliefs. The history of language is an incredible story that stretches back much further than the events of the Bible. While ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics are some of the oldest writing systems we've discovered, spoken language itself is thought to have been far older than these hieroglyphics. Imagine a time before history books, before writing. Our ancestors grunted and gestured and made sounds to communicate. Over countless generations, these sounds became more and more complex, with specific meanings attached to them. And that's how languages like the ones we use today are believed to have begun. Now, pinpointing the exact origin of language is tricky, because it happened so long ago, but scientists believe it emerged sometime between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago. This coincides with the rise of Homo sapiens, modern humans with the capacity for complex thought and communication. The languages we encounter in history, like Sumerian or ancient Egyptian, are just the tip of the iceberg. These were a few of the first civilizations to develop writing systems, allowing them to record their languages for posterity. But many other languages, just as rich and complex, existed for millennia without being written down. Around 1000 BCE, several language families started to flourish. For example, Latin is the ancestor of many Romance languages like Spanish, French, and Italian. Similarly, Sanskrit is the root of many languages spoken in India today, like Hindi and Bengali. Latin in particular played a huge role in shaping the languages of Europe. The Roman Empire conquered vast territories, and Latin became the language of administration, law, and learning. Even after the fall of the empire, Latin's influence continued through the Catholic Church, which used it for religious ceremonies and their religious scholarship for centuries. It also used Latin to sound more authoritative and create distance between the laity and the papacy. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, 1000 AD to 1500 AD, and we see the emergence of languages that more closely resemble what we speak today. English, for example, began as a collection of Germanic dialects brought to Britain by Anglo-Saxon invaders, and over time these dialects merged and interacted with each other, languages like Latin and French eventually evolving into the English we know. The story of language isn't just about historical development. It's about creativity and imagination. Fictional languages now, like Dothraki from Game of Thrones or Klingon from Star Trek, show how we can invent entirely new ways to communicate, even if it's just for storytelling purposes. In other words, language does not have divine origin. Language is not even human. Animals communicate, and we know this. It's not crazy to think that communication evolved over a long period of time. It's still evolving. In fact, it's one of the most observable evolutions in existence. Think of English slang among teens in the 90s versus now. Only 30 years and the slang is wildly different, influenced by various cultural phenomena and technological advances, and let's face it, TikTok. But that's a problem for Christians for a number of reasons. One is the vast time frame involved in language development, we're talking tens of thousands of years, clashes with a literal reading of the Bible creation story. The Bible presents creation and development of humanity in a much shorter time frame, often interpreted as thousands of years rather than millions. Additionally, the idea that languages evolved over time can be seen as connected to the theory of evolution, which evangelicals often reject. They need to believe that God created each language distinctly and with some greater purpose, rather than languages emerging and changing over time. The story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11 describes a single unified language being divided into many by God. And this narrative offers a much simpler explanation for the existence of multiple languages, and obviously aligns with a young Earth creationist view. And Christians in general love simplicity. It's easier to manipulate people who don't ask tough questions. God did it when they built that tower is a much easier to understand concept than ideas of morpheme, syntax, and phonology. But the fact remains that languages gradually developed and diversified over a long period. It is fiction and frankly foolish to say languages were created instantly and divided by God as punishment for human arrogance. For Christians, the Tower of Babel narrative provides a clear-cut explanation that aligns with their beliefs about creation and human history. The vast and complex story of language evolution ruins that narrative. And further than this seemingly insignificant fable is the fact that Christianity sees words as divine innately. In Christian teachings, language and words hold a special place because they're seen as connected to God's creative power and how he communicates with us humans. And one key idea in Christianity is the logos, meaning word in Greek. According to the Gospel of John, Jesus is called the Logos, and through him God made everything. It's like thinking of language as a beautiful symphony conducted by God, where each word plays a crucial part in creating and organizing the world. In the Bible, particularly in Genesis, God creates simply by speaking, "Let there be," and there was. This shows that language isn't just a way to talk, but rather God's powerful tool used to bring everything into existence. It's similar to how an artist uses a brush to paint a picture or a sculptor shapes clay into a sculpture. Language becomes the medium through which God's plans and purposes are expressed and realized in the world. And another important belief is that the Bible itself is inspired by God. This means that while Christians acknowledge that human authors wrote it, they claim that they were guided by the Holy Spirit, making the words of the Bible carry divine truth and authority. This idea makes the words in Scripture more than just stories or teachings. They are considered sacred because they convey God's message to people. They don't see the Bible as a book telling stories, but they see the book as miraculously speaking to those God wants to save. Words are viewed as channels of God's creative power and divine communication. Just like how music can stir emotions or art can inspire, language in Christianity is seen as a sacred way for God to reveal himself and his plans to humanity. Are you starting to see why it's important to me to do this episode about language? Because Christians and non-Christians are on different planets when it comes to understanding what language is, how important it is, how it originated, and how to use it responsibly. But there is an important overlap between the Christian and not when it comes to the language of English. And it's a rather peculiar source. The enduring impact of the King James Bible, published about 400 years ago, continues to resonate profoundly in our language and culture. This influential text has left an indelible mark on English, with its turns of phrase permeating everyday speech across the globe, regardless of whether individuals have ever perused the pages of Scripture. Phrases like "give up the ghost," "salt of the earth," or "put words in my mouth." They effortlessly find their way into our modern discourse, unwittingly echoing the cadences of the historic Bible, specifically the King James Version. And a favorite linguist of mine, David Crystal, who I did invite on the show but regrettably could not come on due to his voice fading at 82 years of age, he meticulously researched the idioms of the KJV in Begot, the King James Bible in the English language. It's a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. He identifies 257 phrases from the Bible in contemporary English. And this influence stretches back to an era when daily readings of the Bible were commonplace, shaping language for everyone, from British cobblers to American presidents. And notably, figures like Dickens praised the Bible's impact on language and education, hailing the New Testament as the very best book that has ever was or ever will be known in the world. The King James Bible's impact on English is profound and complex, shaping language through conservative translation practices that paradoxically foster linguistic innovation. Its legacy underscores not only the Bible's enduring influence on English idiom, but also its pivotal role in cultural and literary history, weaving together ancient wisdom with contemporary expression in a testament to the enduring power of language. Now, both David Crystal and I would say that this influence and impact is often over-exaggerated. I would say this is partially due to just Christian dominance wanting to say its power in culture is irremovable. And be that as it may, the mark of Christianity on our language is not something I'm willing to bow down to. And you may think I'm exaggerating, that Christianity needs to dominate English, or honestly any language it can get its hands on. But beyond the crusades to translate the Bible into every language imaginable, or their desire for the Ten Commandments to be outside of courthouses, or their brutal historical campaign to force the words "under God" and "in God we trust" into our official slogans and pledges, their revisionism and infiltration really knows no bounds. For example, I'm old enough to remember when gay marriage was almost universally illegal in every state. As a few states began to allowing it, eventually, of course, a Supreme Court case was inevitable. For anyone who remembers the arguments against legalizing gay marriage, it was a pretty tough case to make without appealing to religion directly. So what was the main topic of the case for or against gay marriage? The word. The word marriage is what Christians spent more time than anything arguing about. The word marriage has always meant one man marrying one woman, or even when it means one man marrying multiple women, it has never been used to describe two men or two women marrying each other. If we change the definition of marriage, where will it end? Can a man marry his dog, a woman her child? We can't change what this word means, or it will be chaos and a slippery slope into a lawless society. I mean, they really argued like that. That was pretty much it. And now, almost 10 years later, after it's been federally legalized, there's been no rise in incest or bestiality. Societal fabric erosion has more to do with Christian nationalists than pride parades, and in fact, those pride parades are a bit safer now and more fun. But the Christian cultists knew that if that word changed in meaning, it would affect an evangelical system of control. And I'd argue that it did affect that system of control. There's been a lot of ex-evangelicals since then. Because language is indeed powerful. In fact, I'd argue so much of Christianity is words stacked on top of each other so much that by the time you pluck each Jenga piece out of their carefully crafted tower, it will always remain standing. It might change shape. It might need to be rebuilt a little in order to stand. But no God is coming to take that and knock it over. Because human arrogance could never be stopped by multiple languages. In fact, the power Christian nationalists crave can't be stopped by anything. The whole belief system is predicated on a willingness to die to be right, to gamble with your one life that you'll get too. And that's why Christian ideology is so dangerous. Christian pastors, those shepherds of the souls, wield a rather curious crook, a crook not of wood but of words. These words, carefully chosen and imbued with a power beyond mere lexis, serve a multitude of purposes within the flock. First, there is the forging of celestial camaraderie. Through language rich with emotion and steeped in the symbolism of their faith, pastors foster a sense of unity amongst believers. Words like redeemed and blessed bind the congregation together, each term a signal of shared experience and spiritual identity. Pastors illuminate the path with familiar sayings and wisdom gleaned from the Holy Writ. Phrases like trust in God's plan and find peace in prayer serve as compass points, offering believers the confidence to navigate the often murky waters of faith-based decisions. This unity of language extends beyond mere comfort. Pastors cultivate a garden of common ground by employing the very terminology of their faith: grace, salvation, fellowship. These words, like shared seeds, blossom into a powerful sense of belonging. Each utterance reinforces the congregation's identity as a unified entity within the vast field of Christendom. But the shepherd's crook can also be used to acquire more people. Through sermons steeped in persuasive rhetoric, pastors aim to attract new sheep to the fold. Personal anecdotes, relatable interpretations of scripture woven into the fabric of daily life, and promises of spiritual growth and redemption. These are the tools employed to reach those yearning for a deeper connection with the divine. However, the power of these words is not limited to mere emotion. Pastors can also act as interpreters of sacred texts, often clarifying and giving insight into the mysteries of Scripture. By unpacking complex theological concepts and demonstrating their application for everyday life, they illuminate the path for their flock. This in turn strengthens the pastor's role as a spiritual authority. Their pronouncements heavy with the weight of divine decree. The shepherd's crook extends what seems like a comforting hand. Through the language of prayer and pastoral care, pastors offer solace and support. Words that sound of empathy, compassion, and hope create a safe-seeming haven for believers seeking guidance and spiritual healing. This compassionate use of language fosters a sense of trust and allows the flock to approach their shepherd with vulnerability, assuming they will be met with understanding. And pastors, through their pronouncements, claim to champion honesty, humility, and a deep sense of responsibility in their spiritual leadership. This alleged morality fosters trust and strengthens the bond between shepherd and sheep, a relationship built allegedly on shared values and a profound respect for both truth and one another. Thus, the language of Christian pastors seems to be a multifaceted tool wielded with care and purpose. In the hands of a skilled shepherd, his words become a powerful crook, leading their congregation ever closer to a seemingly divine pasture. But hear this. Shepherd crooks were never designed for gentle guiding, but rather abusive prodding, pulling, and punishing. The pastors are cult leaders, who through the artful manipulation of language exert extraordinary influence over their followers. This influence, while seemingly benign at first glance, wields a profound power to shape beliefs, behaviors, and even core identities. These cult leaders deploy linguistic techniques that penetrate deep into the psyche. They employ language that resonates with emotional intensity. They guard and gatekeep sacred meanings that are only knowable if you get into the inner circle. By labeling their adherents or closest circle as enlightened or saved or as a session of elders, they subtly erect barriers between the faithful and the outside world, fostering a sense of exclusivity and superiority. Cult leaders cultivate a climate where critical thought is discouraged through the use of simplistic maxims and slogans. Phrases like "just have faith" or "trust the leader" function not merely as expressions of belief, but as barriers to introspection and questioning. This deliberate stunting of intellectual inquiry serves to cement group cohesion and perpetuate unquestioning obedience. These leaders erect linguistic fortresses by crafting a unique lexicon that sets their group apart from wider society. This specialized vocabulary, exemplified in terms like spiritual walk or in Scientology, auditing, serves not only to facilitate internal communication, but also to isolate followers from external influences. Through this linguistic containment, the leader asserts dominion over the flow of information and shapes the narrative through which reality is perceived. And these narratives are compelling. They're narratives of personal transformation and spiritual enlightenment. They offer solace and purpose to those in search of meaning. By presenting themselves as the bearers of divine wisdom or exclusive truths, they position their teaching as the singular path to fulfillment and salvation. Often they become examples of the messianic imagery they claim to have been changed by. Follow them as they follow Christ. Yet beneath this veneer of certainty lies a subtler strategy, the exploitation of ambiguity and double bind. These leaders adeptly wield contradictory messages and the arbitrary nature of language to sow confusion among their followers, fostering dependence on their interpretations and judgments. This tactic not only erodes critical thinking, but also deepens reliance upon the leader as the sole arbiter of truth. These Christian pastors enforce strict linguistic boundaries to insulate their followers from dissenting viewpoints by dictating what language is acceptable, like don't cuss or pray about it first. They control the parameters of discourse within the group. Any dissent or questioning from within is swiftly branded as heresy, betrayal, sin, spiritually weak, or unwise. It all just reinforces the leader's authority and stifles opposition. In their quest to maintain control, Christian leaders frequently resort to reframing and gaslighting techniques. They manipulate perceptions of reality by selectively interpreting events or teachings to align with their narrative. Followers are subtly coerced into doubting their own judgments and memories, thereby furthering the entrenchment and their reliance on the leader's version of life. The mastery of language by the cult leaders of Christianity is not merely a tool for better communication or effective communication, but rather a potent, intimate instrument of influence. The way they master language shapes beliefs, molds identities, and erects barriers that insulate followers from alternative perspectives. As observers of this phenomenon, it behooves us to remain vigilant against the seductive allure of persuasive rhetoric and to safeguard the autonomy of thought and belief that defines humanity. Cult leaders are masters of manipulation. They wield language like a weapon, twisting it to control, isolate, and exploit their followers. But language isn't just a weapon of evil men. It can be used as a tool for resistance. And here's how we fight back against coercive control, through the very words used to enact it. Cult leaders often employ vague, emotionally charged language. They speak of chosen ones, special knowledge, and impending doom, creating a sense of urgency and dependence. And by identifying those tactics that they do, we can expose the emptiness behind those grand pronouncements. In short, ask questions. What specific evidence do they have to support these intense claims? And is there a way in which these claims are benefiting the leader? Additionally, cults often redefine common words to control thought. Terms like love, freedom, and obedience become warped just to fit the leader's agenda. Reclaim those words. Discuss their true meanings, drawing on many sources, and use your critical thinking. In fact, when dealing with a Christian who uses terms like love, instead of focusing on their supernatural beliefs, focus on that word. What does love mean to them? Do they think that Christians are more loving than non-Christians? Does it depend? What does it depend on? And focus on those words and those the type of language that they are parroting. And remember, they have often had so much redefined for them in their cult experience. Survivor stories are powerful antidotes to cult rhetoric, sharing personal experiences of manipulation and the struggle for freedom. Those things weaken a leader's hold. Those narratives demonstrate the high cost of blind faith and the possibility of escape. But it is true that survivors often get dismissed because Christians believe apostates are inherently sinful and should be avoided. Facts and logic are essential tools. Share information about cult tactics. If you want, you can use my terms. Talk about control, contain, convert. Sometimes giving them something to push back against helps them realize they don't actually have as much pushback as they think. Don't let the conversation be all about Jesus or heaven or salvation. Let the conversation be about their actual lived experience. And encourage individuals to research their church and denomination's history. Highlight the points that are hidden from them about their church or denomination's history. Also, encourage individuals to research their leaders' qualifications, or more often lack thereof. Do they talk a lot about history or language or culture without any kind of formal education on those topics or even lived experience? Remember, the goal in interacting with someone in a cult is to just encourage critical thinking and open-mindedness. Create safe spaces for questions and doubts. Encourage open dialogue within families and communities. Those type of things weaken a cult leader's control over information and fosters a support network for those questioning their beliefs and their groups. And finally, remember that Christianity is a language. It operates with different rules, syntax, and grammar. It teaches absurdities like bodily resurrection, Trinitarian theology, demonic influence, a virgin birth, a talking snake, and an eternal torture chamber. They live in an alternate reality. But those beliefs about the supernatural are as real to them as the other words they say. A work meeting on Monday is no less ordinary to them than the sacrament they took the day before, saying, "This is Christ's body and blood." Those who survived the cult and got out can speak the language of Christianity a little better than those who never experienced that. And thus we often do work like this, trying to bridge the gap between the language Christians are programmed to use and the everyday English you and I use. Perhaps the difference seems like a mere dialect issue. I think it is deeper. Remember, I believed in the Tower of Babel as an adult, and wouldn't dare scrutinize the legitimacy of its source for creating different languages. Scarier still, I preached out of the text and confidently claimed that there was divine wisdom in my sermon on the Tower of Babel. I would have gladly used that story to manipulate others while claiming I loved them. Come to Jesus, I would say, acting like it was a friendly invitation, all the while trying to steal their soul. I would have hoped they shut down their critical thinking in hopes that they'd emotionally attach to my words and fall deeper in love with Jesus. Because ultimately, I wanted them to love the cult as much as I loved the cult. But if I can get out, anyone can. And one important step of leaving a cult is deconstructing the language you used to use and finding a new language to express your own opinions and your own feelings. Embrace the power of responsibly using language as a catalyst for positive change. Uphold a respect for autonomy, allowing individuals the freedom to choose their path without coercion. Let honesty and transparency guide your words, ensuring truth prevails over deceit. Champion diversity of thought with empathy, honoring different perspectives and experiences. Communicate clearly and concisely. Avoid vagueness, manipulation, and confusion. Verify facts and don't just regurgitate cliches you've heard. Focus on unity through shared goals, seeking harmony even in disagreement. Nurture critical thinking and reject stereotypes that divide. Take ownership of your words, mindful of their impact, and celebrate the vibrant web of languages worldwide. Analyze the language of those around you and use language to build bridges instead of walls. The cult of Christianity will continue to use words as weapons, and I will continue to use them as a lifeboat to get away. Because in the end, reclaiming personal meaning of manipulated words becomes the beacon that guides survivors out of the cult's darkness. Pay attention to the language of cult leaders and use your own language to push back against an onslaught of word crimes. Fight the good fight and use language in ways that give individuals freedom instead of chains. This is the final season of the Cult of Christianity, but this is not the last time I will be investigating religions and cults. If you'd like to continue to follow my work, go to jverner.com or follow my Substack at johnverner.substack.com. You can also continue to support my work by going to thecultofchristianity.com and subscribing for a giant backlog of bonus content and stay up to date when my next big project releases. Thank you for listening, subscribing, sharing, reviewing, and as always, keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.